So the Chinese actress Liu Yifei has found herself in hot water after she shared a post by the Chinese state mouthpiece Global Times, which was defending the Hong Kong police. So she basically said, "I support the police, and if anyone doesn't like that, they can attack me as well." That's not a direct quote, but that was the gist of it. Um, and Global Times had described the Hong Kong police going up against rioters and terrorists. Terrorists. This is a typical tactic by Beijing to vilify millions of people who have been protesting in Hong Kong as violent rioters. Um, I'm not going to lie, there has been vandalism and there has been unrest, but the overwhelming majority of demonstrators have been peaceful. And even the incident the other day where they kind of lay down in the airport, I wouldn't necessarily go along with that tactic. I don't think it's a good idea ever to polarize a wider public, polarize commuters. But where else in the world do you see protesters actually apologizing for their actions? They held up signs saying to the international, to commuters, to travelers, we are very sorry if we caused you inconvenience. This is not our intention. But please understand the young people of Hong Kong are fighting for freedom. So I can't think of any other example of a protest where protesters actually apologize in that way. Extinction Rebellion can maybe learn from that. So I don't necessarily agree with that tactic, and I'm not going to say every single one of the protesters are very peaceful. I did see one incident where one lone officer was attacked, but measure that up against the fact that there was profound police brutality. There was a young woman whose eye was damaged. She may lose her eye. There was reports of a young man who was forced to his blood was on the ground and his head was pushed into his own blood. There's a lot of things like this emerging, a lot of evidence as well of brutality from the Hong Kong police, once known as Asia's finest, um, who unfortunately now have become little more than puppets for the communist regime in Beijing. Because I do see this all going back to Beijing. Carrie Lam's a puppet of Beijing, and the Hong Kong police have become, unfortunately, puppets of Beijing. Um, you just have to look at Chinese social media to see what's happening. You know, China or Hong Kong is China. China loves Hong Kong. Hong Kong loves China. There's a real propaganda effort going on there. Um, Hong Kong may be de facto China, but it's very clear that most Hong Kongers despise Beijing rule. That's very obvious. I'm not going to say all of them. Of course, you will get some Hong Kongers who probably think, okay, well, supporting Beijing is a way to end this crisis. But this is a crisis not caused by Britain, not caused by the demonstrators, but by the gradual and obvious erosion of freedoms in Hong Kong and relative autonomy, which was laid out in the Sino British Joint Declaration of 1984. So this crisis, it's absurd for Beijing to blame this on Britain. All we have done, all Jeremy Hunt and the successful Dominic Raab have done, is their duty, which is to point out that the demonstrators have a right to demonstrate, and that China needs to keep its end of the treaty and uphold the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Um, its side of the declaration, I should say, and it hasn't been doing that. It's been showing nothing but contempt for that ever since. Um, People say because of the demonstrations, the guy who murdered his girlfriend is now going to escape justice. Well, I'm conservative on crime. He should face justice, and he can face justice in Hong Kong. But there is a bigger issue here. The reason there's so much anger about these extradition protests, these demonstrators aren't trying to protect criminals. They're worried that dissenters, such as the Hong Kong booksellers, will be deported to the mainland under the rules of this extradition law. That is why it's so serious. Um, anyway, back to the Yufei, the Lu Yufei. Um, as I understand it, she's a naturalized American citizen. I assume, like a number of mainlanders do, they do that for convenience if she's working there, if she's based in Hollywood. I haven't really followed her career in the way that I've followed Gong Li or Fan Bingbing, who herself has now been taken off the radar, albeit for different reasons. But um, This is going to be controversial, but I think there are some mainlanders who they may get citizenship of other countries, but that mainland mentality doesn't really change. And I'm not generalizing, I'm not saying this is the case with everyone, but they still have that kind of ultra nationalistic sentiment within them, and they will still go out of their way to defend the communist regime. If she's defending the Hong Kong police via a communist mouthpiece, she's essentially being a propagandist for Beijing, whatever way you gloss that over. There have been calls to boycott the film. The irony, of course, is Mulan is supposed to be, it's a very old story. Its origins may even go back to Mongolia, not China, but regardless, not to nitpick. The point is, Mulan is a heroic figure. She symbolizes courage against repression. And here we have the star of the film standing up for repression, standing up for a totalitarian regime. So, for that reason alone, she's not suited for the role. Someone like Anastasia Lim, the former beauty pageant winner who has become a fierce critic of Beijing and a brave human rights defender, in my opinion, would far more embody the sort of personality that Mulan is supposed to have. And of course, the Chinese government will be making a big thing of this. I know that Disney wants to kind of pitch to the Chinese market, and that's understandable. It's a Chinese story, but is it to the Chinese market or is it to the Chinese government? If it's the latter, that's concerning. I think now more than ever, the world needs to be standing up to the regime in Beijing. And that isn't just governments, it's also companies and organizations. Um, because what Beijing is doing right now is bully boy tactics. If you don't sign this contract, if you don't do this trade deal, we will threaten you. That's what they've done with Britain and Huawei. And I hope we don't go ahead with Huawei. Um, the only language a bully understands is force, and that is the only language the Chinese Communist regime understands. So shame on you, Liu Yifei, for being a propagandist. You may technically have the freedom of speech to say this, but just remember, there are many dissenters in China who don't have that freedom. And people like her, and Jackie Chan is another example. Chan has long been revered as being a great martial arts hero, but the truth is, he is also a CCP stooge. Um, he famously derided Western countries as more corrupt than China, and yeah, just look at his record. The man's a CCP stooge. He's an entertainer. He's a very skilled martial artist, but as for his personality, I don't have much time for him. Um, I have no respect for any celebrity that supports the Chinese communist regime, no matter what they've achieved. And that's true of any totalitarian regime. If you're going to be an apologist for a single party dictatorship, then you need to expect a backlash. People, it's no good. I've seen people saying, "Oh well, she has freedom of speech." She does, but you know what? Critics have the freedom to criticize her position, and to not use their tax dollars or pounds to go and see a film whose star is a propagandist for the Chinese regime. So, if you believe in human rights, if you really care about the situation in Hong Kong, think carefully about going to see this new Disney film. I do hope it suffers a backlash, and I hope she gets blamed for it.